I'm Gloria Stafford, Assistant Professor of Interior Design here at UNI, and I want to welcome everyone who's in the room here at Schindler Hall on UNI campus, as well as everyone who's watching us live. Before I introduce our panel to talk about the NCIDQ, I want to let everyone know who's watching us via live stream that if anyone at your location wants to ask a question, it is possible to type in a question on the chat box. I hope that makes sense to everyone. So if anyone has questions, if you can just please type them in on the bottom right where it says, say something, and we will read those aloud here and ask the panel to respond. I appreciate everyone coming. The purpose of today's panel discussion is to talk about the NCIDQ exam, which is important for all of us, those of us who haven't yet taken it and those of us who have, as well as talk about the issue of registration for interior design here in Iowa. I'm going to have our four panelists introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask them to not only give a little bit of background about where they work, what they do, but if they could also say when they took the NCIDQ exam. And then after introductions, I'm going to talk about different topics kind of in the hierarchy of how you would go about doing the NCIDQ exam. First, talk about the qualifications, the parts of the exam, dates, where offered, when offered. Then I'm going to ask our panelists to talk a little bit about how they prepared and if they have any suggestions for studying, and then have them talk about the experience of taking the exam. If anyone in the room has questions, just please raise your hand and we'll take questions at any time, as well as after. We'll save time at the very end. Okay, I'm going to have Jessica make an announcement about that too.
Hi guys. I'm Jessica French. I'm your board representative for anything student affairs. And I just wanted to let you guys know this will be available after our discussion today. So if you guys have any questions for those watching that you might have some questions about NCIDQ or something after the fact, you can email me. It's studentaffairs@iidagp.org. Is that right?
Can you repeat that?
Studentaffairs@iidagp.org. Oh, that's right, sorry. studentaffairs@iida-gp.org. It's a little tricky. You can find that on the website, iida-gp.org under the leadership tab. You can find a lot of our information. There's a lot of board members here on our panel, so maybe you guys could mention that as well. So thanks for attending.
All right, so I'm going to start with Kathy, who happens to be a UNI alum, and ask her to introduce herself, and then we'll go down the row.
Okay, sorry, getting used to this here. I'm Kathy Koch, and I am a UNI alum. As Gloria mentioned, I graduated in 2014. I took the NCIDQ exam. I actually took it in two parts. I took it in the spring and fall of 2016. So that's when I got that accomplished. I'm not gonna lie, I don't remember what. Oh, I'm at Saxton. I forgot what we were supposed to say. I've been there for 4 years in Des Moines office, and that is where I'm at today. So was there anything else?
I think that's it, Kathy.
Okay.
I'm Lori Wiles, and this feels really weird to do all of this. I am an interior designer. I own a firm in Cedar Rapids. We do residential and commercial design. I took the NCIDQ in 1986, and at that time it was 2 days. So, and they changed the format shortly after that. So I have no tips for you on how to take it now, but I do know that everything you learn when you're trying to take it is valuable as you go on through your career.
I'm Leah DeVries. I'm a UNI grad also in 2013, and I currently work at Workspace in Des Moines, and I took the NCIDQ a little less than a year ago in April 2018.
I am Kelly Nelson. I am on the board as the VP of members for the Great Plains chapter. I took NCIDQ in 2016 spring and fall, and when I took the practicum portion of it, it was still the hand drawing portion. And I work now in Iowa City at CBRE Huey as a commercial interior designer.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a great panel. All right, I just want to quickly go over some information about qualifications and portions of the NCIDQ exam. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but please, if anyone has asked questions, let me know. And at the same time, I'm going to have Jessica show the, can you go to this, which is the eligibility. All right, there are 3 portions of the exam: IDFX, IDPX, and practicum. The first 2 of those are multiple choice questions, and the third is a design exercise. As we have our panel talk about their experience, maybe they'll talk a little bit about how the experience of doing that portion was. You can take the IDFX as soon as you are finished with your interior design degree. That's fundamental knowledge. And there's no point in your life where you'll probably remember that kind of fundamental knowledge better than the day you graduate. So I encourage people to think in terms of doing that closely after graduation. Any comments from our panel about timing, suggested timing for the IDFX?
In my opinion, it makes sense to me to prepare for them all at the same time, just because you're going to have to read the book and a lot of the material crosses over between the exams. And there's one primary book that you'll use to study, and there's a lot of other materials that you can use as well. But it's the Interior Design Reference Manual by David Kent Ballast.
Can you hold it up again?
So there's quite a variety of different books that you'll hear people talk about, and there's like whole long lists. But when I was starting to study, this was the one that kept coming up that people had used successfully to pass the exam. So, I mean, this kind of goes into a different question, but in terms of what you'd want to use as your study materials, I think it works well to pick just one book as your main study material and then supplement with a variety of other resources if there's different subjects that you need more information on or that you feel maybe weren't covered as closely in certain classes or your work experience. So I think a lot of people use this textbook, and there's a few different versions of it. This one's the 6th edition, so I think there might even be a newer one out now, but generally, I think it covers a lot of the same material among the different editions.
And to piggy off Kelly, I would agree that I don't think you need to push yourself to take it right away if you're not feeling comfortable, because it is also very experience-based, and you'll see on the website that they do mention that quite a bit, and I would agree with that. In addition to the studying overlapping, I might be diving in too deep already, but there isn't really too big of a difference between the IDPX and the IDFX. The PX does have more contract information in it, which is essentially the last like 8-9 chapters of the book. So 3/4 of the book covers both of the tests. So it does work out to take them both of the multiple choice at the same time because you're essentially studying the same information. I did take the test split because I did take the IDFX in the spring and then the PX that fall. And I regretted it because I just felt like I was repeating information and had lost, because you take a break. It's not like you keep going. So I think it works out well if you can piggyback those 2 together. But again, I think it's what you're comfortable doing also as how you study personally.
Okay.
One more thing. If you go on the CIDQ website, there's a couple of different exam blueprints that show like what's covered in each of the exams. So if you are considering taking them separate, then that can be a helpful resource to know what to focus on for each of them. So like she said, it kind of depends on what you feel comfortable with, whether you take it together or not.
Okay, well, thank you. That's really good information. So in other words, even though you can take the IDFX immediately after graduating, maybe that isn't the advice of our panel, that maybe waiting until you are eligible to take those other two portions, which is after a certain quantity of work hours. If you're graduating with a bachelor's degree, it's about 3,500 hours, about 2 years of experience out in the field. That's when you're eligible for the IDPX and the practicum. So what I'm hearing from our panel is really advice to wait and do all three at the same time?
Yeah, and also coming out of school, obviously, you're probably either looking for an employer or just starting with one. So if you wait, also you may, if you're fortunate enough to have an employer that pays for the exam, it's also worth waiting to have that help as well, because it is not cheap. So just another thought.
Any advice about how to ask your employer to pay for the exam?
Usually they're aware of it if it's a company that has an interiors department. So they probably already have some kind of standard in place, whether they pay up front or they pay after you pass. So I think it's just something to have a conversation with, and I'd be surprised if they don't have a standard in place. But if they don't, that's where IIDA can be a great resource. You can connect with some professionals who do have that knowledge and can help with how you can have that conversation.
So I want to talk to you in case you don't think you want to be a commercial designer and how that applies to residential interiors. And what I really find is that the knowledge of codes and structure and design in general is going to help you in residential elevate yourself much more quickly than if you don't know this. So we'll go into it a little more later, but being technically strong, which is what the NCIDQ really does, is set a minimum competency for you as an interior designer. But that being technically strong will benefit you whether you're doing commercial or residential. So don't think this is just for commercial designers.
Thank you. I think that's a very important point. Just some other logistics about taking the exam. You can take it during the months of April and October. And the locations, it's given at test sites run by a company called Proxemics, am I saying that? Prometrics, thank you. And there's a link on the NCIDQ Exam website that takes you to the Prometrics testing website where you can find locations to take the exam. Can you say where you took it, where nearest place here for us?
Well, I'm based out of Des Moines, so there was a testing center in Des Moines that I took the multiple choice exams at. Like Kelly, I did the hand drafting portion of the practicum, so I actually had to go to Omaha for that. But I believe you can do that in Des Moines both sessions now, right? Otherwise, I'm not sure where else in Iowa there is one. Is
yeah.
there? Does it say? In West Des Moines, there is one. It's off Jordan Creek Parkway.
I'm not sure as well what other locations that there are in Iowa.
There is a location in Coralville. I think there's others around the state as well.
All right. And I'm not sure about Nebraska.
Carly, is there one in the Quad Cities? She's saying yes, so the Quad Cities also has one.
Any idea for Nebraska whether there's one in Omaha? I would assume so. All right. Anyway, you can find the appropriate link on it's showing up on our screen right now. I think that this leads us to a very important point since we are talking about the three portions of the exam. The fact that the practicum exam has changed in format so very recently, I want our panel to talk about. For anyone who took it before about 2016, it was a manual drawing exercise of designing a space that's been given to you. That practicum portion has since been computerized for test takers, and I'd like Leah to talk about that because she has taken it in that format.
So, like she said, now it's all computerized, and it's split up into 3 sections. So there's a large commercial case study, a small commercial case study, and then also a residential case study. And so that test is the longest out of the 3 tests between the IDPX, IDFX, and then the practicum. And that is in the same testing center as the other ones. So you pretty much just sit at a computer and go through each of the case studies. And it's a variety of questions that are just practical applications of whatever case study it is. So it could be like a school, it could be a large office building, it could be an apartment building. So based on what you study, you kind of practice what one of those practicum tests would be, and then answer the questions that way. So sometimes it's putting symbols on a floor plan, sometimes it's recognizing errors on a reflected ceiling plan, understanding like door types and that sort of thing, and placing which ones are which, or which ones are indicated as incorrect door types, or different things like that. So there's probably similar things that they were tested on with their version of the practicum, but this one is all computer-based. So there's also some like fill-in-the-blank questions, but usually those I think were all like one-word answers too. So it's not like you have to write a paragraph about something. It's just a term or a number or something like that.
So Leah, are you placing things using the computer program? You're placing furniture, placing symbols on the plan?
Yeah. So there's, I think, 3 different types of questions, if I remember correctly. So one of them was placing items on a plan. So there'll be like a box of different choices you can pick from to place them. So that could be like different outlet, like a duplex outlet, and different things like that on an electrical plan, or different door key numbers. So that's like one different type of question. There's a fill in the blank, which would be just typing in a number. So you might have to do a calculation like wall covering calculation, or occupancy number. So it'll just be typing in a number. And then the other one I think is just a multiple choice question, if I remember correctly. I'd have to look that up. But so you'll know the types of questions to expect. And I mean, once you are familiar with the codes that NCIDQ puts out for that particular test, then you reference that and just reference your experience. That kind of carries over from the other 2 tests into these practical application questions.
And something Leah noted I'll elaborate on a little more is that the practicum does have its own set of codes. So instead of, obviously all of the states have their own different versions of building codes depending on what year they've adapted. So the NCIDQ has its own specific set, and you can reference that during the test, which is nice. But you can also learn just that specific set of codes, because then you don't have to worry about everything. It's good to keep that in mind too, that there is just the NCIDQ exam codes and that you don't have to know everything. So that also helps with keeping the test a little bit easier to study for as well.
And one tricky thing that a lot of people get caught up on with those codes is a lot of them are based on true codes, but since the NCIDQ test is covered across the US, there's different codes that are specific to each region, so they had to develop a set of codes that everyone can use for this test. So there's some that might not be exactly accurate for your location. So it sounds kind of bad, but you kind of have to throw out some things that you know are true for maybe work that you do or things that you've learned in school, and just study these specific codes that are given to you.
And that's just for the practicum, right? If I remember right?
Correct. And so I think maybe one recommendation in terms of how you time the tests, I would probably recommend at least taking the IDPX and IDFX together, but then maybe take the practicum later, just so you can focus on that set of codes that maybe isn't what you want to know for the IDFX and PX, because those are based on like true things. Yeah.
I want to ask a question about how the period of time you're given to take the test, but I just want to clarify something. So in other words, while you're taking the practicum, you are given a document, and they say this is the code document that you will be using. Is that correct?
Yes, and that code document is available online, so you can look at it beforehand and get really familiar with it, but it's helpful to have it as a resource while you're taking the test. So you don't necessarily have to have it exactly memorized, but since the test is timed, you really want to know it really well because you don't want to waste time searching through it to find a specific code that's specific to a question you're working on.
Yeah, I would agree. You want to know them so that you're not wasting time trying to find the codes, but it's nice because you don't we forget things, so you can quick look something up, or if it's a code that we're not used to working with, you can at least double check yourself on it, but don't assume that since you can have the codes next to you that you shouldn't study them. You still should know them in and out so that you can quickly keep moving through the test.
Okay, I have one more question. When you take the practicum, are you given a choice as to whether you want a residential space, a healthcare space, a retail space, or they just give you a case study that's corporate or healthcare? Is that, you don't have a choice?
You don't have a choice. You just know there's going to be one large commercial, one small commercial, and a residential. So whatever fits within those. So if you're doing different practice tests and that sort of thing, you might get a dentist office for one and then an apartment for one. And so you kind of just have to be ready for that, but you won't know exactly what the type of space is.
Okay, so many of us are still learning about this new practicum format because it's been changed so recently. It used to be that you had, like in Kathy's day, you had one space to design. Now what I'm hearing is...
And you didn't know what it was. You didn't know if you were getting residential or commercial or what kind of commercial it was going to be. You just knew you were going to have to space plan something.
But now it's actually 3 spaces that you're talking about, or 3 case studies.
It's 3 case studies, but I'm not as familiar with that version, but it's not like you're completely drawing out a space. You're maybe placing certain walls in the space or figuring out things that are related to a floor plan that you're kind of given already. So there's a lot that's there, and you just have to do specific questions related to those spaces.
And I think the reason that all these changes came about is just that so many designers were saying that they didn't feel very proficient in manual drafting, and then had to go in and manually draft the practicum. And I think that's why it's been converted to more of a computer-based, which then, as we're hearing, necessitated other changes in how it's done.
And one other thing to note about that, even though it's computer-based, you're probably familiar with like Revit and AutoCAD and SketchUp and those kind of programs. It's not based on one specific program, so you don't have to so much worry about, oh my gosh, I don't know this program very well. It's a very generic way that they ask the questions, so it shouldn't trip you up as much if you're not as proficient in being really quick in Revit or whatever. So that's helpful to know going into it. I think if you know how to use like a computer, you should be able to place things and not be so concerned about the technology aspect of it.
Okay. Can anyone speak to the amount of time frame you're given to complete each portion?
Yeah, you want to?
So the multiple choice, and correct me if this is what my memory is remembering, you get 3 hours for the IDFX, which is the one that you can take earlier, and it's a little shorter. I think it's only 100 questions, right? Or is it 7? It's shorter than the PX. And then the IDPX, I believe, maybe Jessica can look this up really quick on the website for us to confirm. Oh, perfect. Okay.
The IDFX is 125 questions, and it's 3 hours. The IDPX is 175 questions, and it's 4 hours. And then the new version of the practicum, I think the website says it's 4 hours, and there's 40 questions per case study, but I think I got 4.5 hours when I took it, but that extra half hour, which I didn't know about until I was in the testing center, I had to go through the intro portion too, so if you can flip through the intro really quick, that's really basic questions about taking a test in a testing center, then you get extra time, which was helpful for me on that section.
And is this done over a 2-day period or 3-day period?
You can decide when you schedule your tests. So it's in April and October when the testing days are. So you just have to go on the Prometrics website and schedule whenever you want. So if you want to get a couple out of the way at the same time and then later in the month, take the other one. You can kind of schedule it how you want. I know someone, I think, had mentioned they took both the IDFX and the PX all in the same day, which sounds like a lot to me because that's like 7 hours of testing all in one day. But I mean, everyone takes tests differently, so you kind of just have to decide what is going to work best for you.
Honestly, I took both IDFX and IDPX in the same day, and it was to get them out of the way and like not be thinking about the second test over the next few days. But yeah, by the time I got to the second one, which was IDPX, which was a little bit harder for me, I felt like I was kind of burned out and not able to focus on the questions.
I took the IDFX, I think, on a Thursday, and then I took the IDPX on the next day, Friday, which I was glad to get them done right after each other because I kind of studied for everything all at the same time. And then I think a week later, I took the practicum. So then I just focused that last week on the third test. But everyone does it different. I know some people totally space it out so they can focus on one at a time.
Okay. I'd like to, if there's any questions right now about particulars, logistics? If not, I'm going to transition into studying and tips for studying and whether solo studying or group studying works well. We did talk about the reference book, but I'll turn it over to our panel to talk about how long to study, how to study, strategies for that.
So I'll start out by saying I used QPractice as a guide. It's an online resource where you can sign up for like a study group that's online. They have videos and quizzes that you can take, and they have a program that lays it out for you what your timeline should be for preparing for the exams. So I started 3 to 4 months before the exams each time, and then set aside a certain amount of time each week, usually evenings after getting home from work, put a couple hours in studying, and then either one full day on the weekend or maybe a little bit of both days on the weekends to prepare. And I will say it takes a lot of time preparing. You have to give up some activities. You got to be realistic. It is a commitment. And if you want to pass the first time, you have to put the time in.
I felt like when I was studying, it was a very short amount of time. I felt like I was kind of behind when I started. So I pretty much studied every day right after work. There's a few nights that I didn't, but it was about 3 hours a day probably for 3 months, which was kind of a lot. And I did Q practice online also, and I did the Q prep class that IIDA put out that year, and then I also did this book online and kind of supplemented it with a few other resources depending on subject matter that I wasn't as familiar with. And then I also had a study group. There's a couple other people in my office that were taking it, and then another gal in the area was in our study group. So we got together every Friday for 3 months and just talked about what we were learning, and it was helpful to talk about things that maybe one of us was more familiar with or had more experience about. So I thought that was really helpful, and it also helped us stay on track with our reading in the book and just different study things. I think the accountability was really helpful for me.
I would say I agree with everything they said. I think you just kind of find a method that works for you. For me, it was not studying after work, and it was just hammering stuff out on the weekends because I don't know, I got home from work and I didn't want to study. So I put together a calendar for myself for how many chapters I needed to read each week in order to have a few weeks before the exam. So I think I had like 3 weeks before the actual test to review everything and to kind of overlap everything and not feel like I was cramming. So that helped me a lot to have a schedule that I was trying to stick with. And then a couple girls I was working with as well also had the same schedule, so that was motivating. So we may not have been studying together, but knowing that if you didn't keep up with the rest of the group, you were probably going to fall behind was nice, because we would talk about things as we were going through them, because again, sometimes people understand things differently, so it is nice to have that help with that. And then the practicum studying was different when I did that, so I'm just not going to talk about that because it was not awful, not awesome.
Can you clarify, is the Q Prep found on the IIDA website? Is that where you find Q Prep?
So Q Prep is, I don't know if we have it on our website, but it is something that our chapter does set up for the group. We are actually, we probably don't want to talk about that too much today, because I think we are exploring some different options for that, because the Q Prep class was great when we did the hand drafting portion, because back when the practicum used to be a hand drafting test, it was all about knowing what you needed to do to pass and focusing on those things. So the class taught you that, but now that the test is more, computerized, I think it's more questions than it is strategy. That probably makes no sense to you guys, so I'll stop. But so watch for, and no matter what chapter you guys are in, because obviously you may not be staying in the area, just check with your IIDA chapter. I'm sure even if they don't have a class, that there are other people studying that you can connect with. So that way you do have some individuals to help you get through. But the Q Prep class is recommended if it is available.
Okay, great. Thanks. Now I'd like to just spend a couple minutes on hearing from the panel about their experience at the time, in the moment. Were there nerves? Were the instructions easy to follow? Test time adequate? How quickly did you get your results? How quickly did you find out the results? If you could speak to some of those issues.
For the IDPX and IDFX, when I took it, it was about a month turnaround time to get the results. But I think now they've even changed the system in the past year that I think they right away or that same day give you the results for those two tests. And if I understand right, they're kind of like rough results. So you'll still maybe have to wait a month to get the official results. But everyone kind of talked about how much they hated that month of waiting time, but I actually kind of liked it because then you don't know for sure if you pass, and it's just kind of a nice, you can't do anything anyway, so you just have to let it be. Yeah, I kind of liked it, but not very many people did. And then the practicum, I think it's still going to be a month turnaround time to get your results. So again, depending on how you feel about that, it is kind of what it is, just because they need to process through with the results and make sure if there are any bad questions on their end that they pull those out so it doesn't affect other people's scores.
I'm glad she brought this question up, because actually some of the best advice I remember getting before I took it was just about the testing experience, because it isn't your typical walk in and take the test, since it is a testing center. They do give you a locker that you have to put everything in, because to prevent cheating, you can't bring anything with you. So they literally wand you down like you're going through the airport. So if you're not mentally ready for that, I think it can kind of offset you. So it's just good to know that ahead of time going in, because you're already nervous and worried and don't know what's going to happen. So just to know that that's going to happen, I think is a big help. And then also you are in a room with other people, so they could be chewing gum or coughing and sneezing. They do give you these really disgusting headphones you can put on. I did wear them. It was gross, but it helps, because then you don't have to worry about it, because you can't prevent who's sitting next to you and you're in there for a long time. So just be aware of that is going to come at you. And then if you do need to go out and go to the restroom, it's not a big deal. You go out, you have to sign out so they know you're leaving. But then when you come back in again, they wand you down again. So it's not like you're trapped in that room for 4 hours. I know I was worried about that, because I was like, what if I have to go to the bathroom? Like that, what are you gonna do? But no, it's not a big deal. So don't feel like you can't get up. Timing wise, I thought for the multiple choice, the timing was okay. Did you guys? I thought it was enough time. with the way the exam is set up, you can flag questions so you can go back to them. So I remember I went through everything once and kind of flagged what I thought maybe I didn't know or if I for sure didn't know. And then I took whatever time was left to go back through those flagged questions just to really think through them again. Because I was kind of antsy when I first got in there, and I think I just started going through it. So I was glad that I could go back through those flagged questions again. But then also once you go, even if you get through the whole exam, you can go through it again. You aren't stuck with your answer once you're done. So I know there's different test taking strategies behind doing that, but I did go back through my flagged answers and it must have worked because I did okay. So, but again, to each their own discretion.
I was fine for time for both of the multiple choice ones. I did run out of time for the practicum one, so that I felt like was a little bit challenging for me, but I know others who took it at the same time as me felt like it was fine, so I think it just depends on your testing style and how quickly you process through information or overthink answers and things like that. So,
as far as practice exams that you can do for the multiple choice, I don't know if the questions necessarily helped me study, but sitting down for 4 hours and answering 150 questions was helpful because I at least had that rhythm then, because obviously we don't just sit down and take tests for fun. So it was a good practice to go through and just sit down for 4 hours and make yourself answer a bunch of questions. So I would recommend doing that just so that you have that kind of rhythm with you also, so you're not getting test fatigue. I mean, you're probably going to get that anyways. But.
Okay. That was great information. And I'm going to turn our discussion just a little bit because I can almost sense the temperature in this room as being like, I mean, I almost feel nervous about all that I've heard, and I took the exam 25 years ago too. So I think as we listen and talk about the challenges of this exam, it's important also to reflect on why we do it and why it's worth all this effort. And I am a huge advocate for all interior designers to take this exam because I think that it celebrates all that we know, and it is a huge way to acknowledge our worth, both to ourselves and to others. And I think even above and beyond the personal recognition, it's very important that as a profession, a whole profession, we use this exam to separate those of us who have the experience and the education from those of us who don't and don't know how to do what we do. So I'd like to hear from both our panel, Lori in particular, and maybe even from some of the professionals in the group about thoughts about that very issue. Why is it worth all this effort? Yes, please.
We talked about this a little bit earlier before our session today, and I find that the field is flooded with people who say they're interior designers. And because the profession was late to the game for defining interior design and interior decoration as two different things, possibly part of the same career, but definitely not exactly the same, I think that the NCIDQ is a major differentiating factor in our profession. So you all have put in the time and are much, much more educated about how to make things work than someone who, let's say they just had a great knack for color. In my career, when people have said, oh, my sister-in-law is an interior designer. She picks paint all the time. It's infuriating. And so it's gone from being infuriating to being laughable now and say, great, they should do this for you. So they should figure out how to place all of the things in your clinic or your 10,000 square foot house. That's going to be great. So do that. But what we need to do is continue to keep the rest of our profession accountable. And so you've gone through all the work of getting the education, and now your next step is really to prove that you are competent. And then you're going to have other next steps. And so, for example, in the state of Iowa, as well as several other states, there's a registration, a type of licensure that is, for our state, is not mandatory, but it is in other states. So just the fact that you've gone through this program, you have a leg up on almost everyone else starting out in this field. And then, but the NCIDQ is another level for you to meet that no one can ever take away from you. And then there are continuing things for you to achieve. And I listen to this and I think I have like flashback test anxiety just listening to these guys. And I do want to tell you that when I took the NCIDQ, there was a woman who brought, like, you couldn't leave the room at all. The bathroom was in the room, and you brought your lunch in, and she brought in fried chicken, and it was like all over her plans, and she immediately failed the test. So it was really great. So anyway, the main point is that this test is like many other tests you've taken. It's very important. But it says I'm willing to go to that next level that most people are not willing to go to.
Anyone else? Okay, so why'd you do it? Tell us.
I guess I did it partially because I knew that was my next step to move forward in my career. And I guess what I gained from it was a little bit more respect in the workplace, but also just a better understanding of everything that was going on. There's terms in our office that I hear every day, and some of them I wasn't familiar with until I actually read the book and was like, oh, that's what that is. So it just gave me a better understanding and kind of brought everything together. And yeah.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think there's a lot of things that are covered in the exam that you maybe won't deal with on a day-to-day basis, but someone else in a different job in the design industry will. And I mean, for one, you don't know exactly where you're going to be in 10 years, depending on your job or whatever, but just having that understanding of what other people are working on in projects that you're also working with is really helpful. So I think that was a major plus for me.
Sure you want to say something?
I would agree with both of them. I think, I'd hit that point where, you go through school and you kind of hit all these check marks of you graduate and you get a job and you do all these things and you're kind of like, now what? Now what's, what do I do next? And really doing the NCIDQ was that next career step of making that progress and taking that next step up. So I think just as a personal reward, it's also great also because you get done with it and it's a really great feeling. I mean, because anyone who's gone through it knows how hard it is and how much work it is. So just being able to put yourself on that level with those people is really rewarding. But then to also have that extra knowledge, because some of it does come back from school. Like you do learn a lot of code and you learn a lot of different things, but there is a lot that you do learn taking through the exam that, for example, I work for a furniture dealership right now. So there's some code and building things that I maybe wasn't using on a regular basis, but I now feel like I have a better familiarity with because I took the exam. So if I am in a construction meeting and they're talking about, I don't have an example off the top of my head, but like terminology and verbiage and just different things, you do feel like you know what they're talking about more. It is kind of like taking an extra class almost because you are going through another textbook and taking tests. So I think it is kind of an added educational element as well. It's a good way to view it.
We have several professionals in the audience here. If there's anyone out there who's in a hiring capacity and would like to speak to whether looking at two interior design applicants, one NCIDQ and one not, whether that would make a difference? Yeah, Carly has the microphone. And if you could introduce yourself, Jane, thanks. Hold on. Hold on just a second. We're testing. Here.
Check, check.
Oh.
Hello, now you can hear me. All right. So I'm Jane Miller. I'm with ISG in Waterloo here. And when we're looking to hire interior designers, it kind of depends on what type of position we're looking for. But if it's more of an entry level person, obviously they probably haven't taken the test. But if we're looking for more of an interior designer that has experience, then we certainly look at somebody that has an NCIDQ registration.
Is there anyone else in the out here that has anything to say on this? All right. Thank you, Jane. I appreciate hearing that. As many of you may be aware, once you do pass the NCIDQ, here in Iowa, you're then eligible to become a registered interior designer. So again, there's another step, another piece of energy to put forth to go again one step further in your professional development. And I'd like to have Lori talk about why additionally do that, and what the process is for doing that.
So when we talked about you've achieved a level with the education that you have, you take the NCIDQ after you have to have some experience before you can do that. I wrote this down so I'd remember it, but essentially you have to have, to become registered in the state, you have to have 6 years of education and work experience combined, and you have to have passed the NCIDQ. I really want to encourage all of you to understand what registration is in our state. We really don't have a ton of people that are registered in the state, but what the registration does is say to the public and to other professionals that require registration, like engineers and accountants and surveyors and architects, and that you are a recognized, legitimate profession, because this is the profession that everyone wants to be and no one wants to do the work for it. So it has this, again, it's this, oh, this person is great at it. And what we're seeing culturally through TV, through videos, Instagram, all of that, are people who are celebrities that have zero professional qualifications. That's fine. That's what they're doing. That's great. But they have a staff who has what you have. So understand that behind all of those people are people doing the work, and you are doing the work. So the registration really says we're a profession. We are not a hobby. There are standards that we achieve. And from my perspective, what registration really does is hold you accountable for continuing your education. For example, we require 12 hours of continuing ed to stay registered, and that's every 2 years. That has recently become that we're going to have 12 hours in a designation called HSW. I'm going to tell you what HSW is, because you probably don't. HSW is Health, Safety, and Welfare. So that means that we're really talking about how does every product affect the people who are using it. That can be ergonomics, that can be products that off-gas, that can be new ways to stop people from sliding around, that can be the carpet that you put in a hospital. Anyway, go ahead. So building code related. So for a professional, once you've passed that NCIDQ, then your registration is going to require you, hold you accountable to continuing to learn more and more and more. So I've done this 35 years. And if I did not continue to be educated in what's coming up, and it wouldn't be interesting. I would have thought I've done everything. And I haven't done everything. And that's how this profession can really just get to you. There's always something to learn. And the registration also keeps you in contact with other professionals that are continuing to do better and better and better work. And that's what you need to be doing all the time.
Thank you. Very well said. It's all about professional growth. Any other comments on that or questions at this point? All right. I'm going to ask our panel if they have some closing thoughts about any of these topics: NCIDQ, registration, interior design.
I know Gloria said this too. A lot of you are probably like, holy cow, what did we all just talk about? Don't be scared. Don't be intimidated by it. It's not, once you really get into it, it's less overwhelming than maybe it sounds right now. It is still a lot. It's a big dedication, but it's totally worth it. So don't leave here scared today. Come up and talk to us afterwards if you have questions that you don't want to ask in front of everybody. Your employer will probably also have some recommendations, or again, you can connect through IIDA. You'll meet up with people who have taken it and help you get through it. So you're not alone in it. Just keep your head up and get it done. It's worth it.
I'll just say that the recommendations that we have are what worked best for us. You really need to figure out what works for you and your schedule and what study methods make sense for you. And that's different for everyone. So just getting a variety of information is good for you.
All right. No questions? Oh, great.
Hi, guys. One thing I will point out is a lot of you are like IIDA student members. I'm definitely going to put in a plug to stay involved in IIDA after you graduate. There's a couple of reasons for that. I actually just had a great conference call with Ryan Ben, who's our headquarters contact, and he works with people all over the country. So your IIDA membership is a national membership. So if you move to Denver, you can work with Ryan or myself. We're your liaison to try and help you to get connected with other IIDA professionals. So don't think this information is just relative to Iowa or Nebraska or something. This is, you know, nationally something that you can do. And I know just based on our chapter, since I'm involved with some of that with our professional development, is that we do offer a Q prep class, but it does take your involvement as well. So if people are interested in that, the Q prep class, I think we touched just a little bit on, but it's kind of the preparation 2-day course that's really helpful to help kind of take care of the unknowns, so kind of learning about the exam a little bit more. So I would just encourage continued IIDA membership, because I think there's a lot of resources, and I think a lot of people are staying connected and figuring out who is taking the exam based on other members being involved and kind of getting connected that way. So I would just encourage you to stay involved.
Yeah, I definitely found my study group of people outside of people I work with through IIDA. I wouldn't have met them otherwise.
All right. If there aren't any other questions, I want to thank everyone for coming and being interested and involved in IIDA and interested in NCIDQ and registration. We very much appreciate you being here, and our panel will be around for a little bit of time afterwards if you do have questions you'd like to ask them in person. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.